All right. All right. Damian Cassidy, why boomers insist they had it harder. Let's get into it.
According to the Federal Reserve, baby boomers have officially become the richest generation to ever live, with a
That's insane. The richest generation in human history is the baby boomers. The richest.
combined net worth of 4 times that of millennials. But the
Hold on. Let's look at this pie chart.
richest generation to ever live, with a combined net worth of
So,
four
silent generation, their parents, baby boomers' parents, is the smallest out of all these. Um, which is kind of crazy. A lot of people think, oh, old people, they just had it better economically. But really, the baby boomers' parents, they had it the worst, you know. Um, well, maybe it's because they're dead. Maybe it's because they're dead. Anyways, silent generation, they went through the Great Depression. They went through war, World War One, World War Two, and the baby boomers kind of ate those benefits that the silent generation basically went through. Um, but I'm sure there was a lot of BS that came from being raised by this generation that went through so much BS, that went through so much of that.
times that of millennials. But despite the fact that no living generation will ever reach that level of wealth accumulation, many boomers still believe they got the short end of the stick. With a conviction so strong, people are already attacking the premise of this video without even giving me a chance to explain. So why is the wealthiest generation in American history so convinced they lived a life of hardship? Following World War II, while both Europe and Japan faced the immense task of rebuilding from the war's catastrophic destruction, the industrial dominance of the United States, combined with nearly 70% of the world's gold reserves, allowed it to emerge as the dominant force in the global economy. And as the US accounted for half the world's industrial output, it was also backed by strong union representation and newly developed labor protections, which drove wages up by over 60% by the end of the war, allowing millions of soldiers to return home to a nation primed for economic growth, where between 1946
Yeah, like they went through war, they went through the Great Depression, and then they had kids. And imagine being a baby boomer and both your mom and dad, they went through World War II. They got married at a young age. They went through the Great Depression. Um, they were probably, a certain type of parent, Probably not the, probably went through some BS as a parent. But anyways, I had this conversation about 6 months ago with this 96-year-old. Nah, not 96-year-old. He's between, he was either, I think he might have been 86. Anyways, he was old. He was an older guy. And he said, no, never mind. He wasn't even that old. He was 76, I believe. Hold on. I remember he told me that when was the Vietnam War? When was the Vietnam War? I forgot his age. I thought he was like 96, but I think he was younger than that, to be honest with you. Um, Vietnam War, 55 to 75, 20 years. What? Uh, Draft. What? All right, let's just say 1950. 2025 minus 1950. 75. Oh no, yeah, he was 95 because he told me he was 20 years old whenever they were trying to draft him. Well, not whenever they tried to draft him. So I was right. The 96-year-old man. I was working at a fast food restaurant. They ain't pay me shit, right? $10 an hour. And I was working a lot. And this old man, I was just talking to him. He was a very nice old man, by the way. He looked young and healthy, and he was walking around like he was walking around like he was 50 years old. Anyways, he was a real good guy. He said whenever he was my age, So around 18, 19, I was 18 at the time. He said that he worked for 10 months getting paid like 60 cents an hour to get a brand new, was Mustangs around back then? I could have sworn he said Mustangs. 50s Mustang. He told me he got a brand new, like at the time Mustang for working 6 months at a fast food restaurant. Not 6 months, but 10 months at a fast food restaurant. I was just, my mind was blown. You know, I just bought my first car 3 days ago, and I'm in massive debt, and I work 2 jobs. Anyways, I've been saving my money for like a year now. Whatever.
In 1964,
By the way, these fuckers were getting married.
to a nation primed for economic growth, or between 19...
Imagine getting home from the war. You know, 19, 20 something years old, you instantly get married. Most people, they look at you like you're weird or you're making a mistake if you're getting married at 20 years old, or even anywhere in your early 20s. If you get married in your mid 20s or later on, you know, it's whatever. People don't look at you like you're weird, but people, they put pressure on you if you get married in your early 20s or in your late teens nowadays. But this is what they were doing back in the day. Nowadays, you know, they used to pressure you at 20 years old to get married. Now they pressure you at 30 years old to get married.
46 and 19...
I know I'm not even a minute in this video. I'm yapping. I feel like yapping today. Look, this is a theory I have on why certain social pressures are being pushed forward, right? Back in the day, you could afford a house and a car and a wife and kids off of one man's, 40-hour-a-week income with one job back in the day, whenever you're 20 years old. Nowadays, you're fucking 40 years old. Most people ain't affording nothing off of one man's income, you know? So that's why a lot of times social pressures, whenever you're 20 years old, they might have been pressuring you to get married, have kids, have family. Then now they still think of you as a kid if you're 20 years old. I think that's a big reason why nowadays people, they take longer to mature and to get into a marriage and have families and such, because of a big reason is because of financial, things are just different financially, work-wise, everything of the sort.
1964, 76 million baby boomers were born in the United States, an
That's a whole lot.
increase of nearly 50 million more children than the baby booms of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia combined.
So
More children than the baby booms of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia.
after World War II, the United States had way more, because if you look, every single one, not every single one, Australia didn't, but most of these countries, they had a baby boom as well. But our baby boom was more than the UK, Canada, and Australia's baby boom in total. I say Australia, I mean Austria. In total. So the United States had basically a entire country's worth of people born like in a snap,
Combined, setting the cultural expectation that the sheer size of the baby boom alone would guarantee continued American prosperity. But despite the baby boom being fueled by post-war economic expansion, where homeownership jumped from just 40% before the war to over 60% by 1960, it's crucial to understand that the majority of parents tasked with
60% of people owned a home back in 1960. I don't even know if I'll ever own a home, but that's the goal, but I'm not sure. homes are very expensive nowadays.
with raising nearly half the nation's population, had spent their own childhoods under a rigid and disciplinary model mirrored by the assembly line, as children contributed nearly 30% of household income leading up through the 1930s, where this live to work mentality was only compounded by these
Yeah, so imagine your dad was contributed 30% of their household income at 8, 9 years old. Or your dad grew up in the Great Depression, then he got drafted into World War I, drafted into World War II, and then he had yo bitch ass, and you're just born in the best times, financial times in human history. um yeah, your parents probably treated you like you were a punk,
psychological
which is crazy because now baby boomers treat us like we're punks, or even millennials like they're punks.
weight of the Great Depression followed immediately behind the responsibility of defending the country throughout the Second World War. And while history
Exactly.
would later come to label this period as the golden age of capitalism, for the parents living through it, it wasn't about prosperity. It was about figuring out how to raise a child in a world they didn't recognize, creating a
Exactly.
parenting model fundamentally rooted in fear and unspoken rules, as they prioritized permanence, routine, and material stability, while attempting to resolve their own childhood traumas and anxieties through the lives of their children.
These boys greet their dad as though they are genuinely glad to see him, as though they had really missed being away from him during the day and are anxious to talk to him,
Causing hundreds of thousands of parents to look for the aid of professionals to help mold what was increasingly seen as the perfect child, where Dr. Benjamin Spock's The Common Sense Book of Baby and Childcare became the defining voice of this movement, selling over 500,000 copies in just 6 months, second only to the Bible, where his philosophy emphasized a permission to be flexible, prioritizing emotional well-being and personal happiness over the strict disciplinary model their parents had experienced. However, this emphasis on flexibility and responsiveness was often twisted into permissiveness, where parents now believed they had the right to relinquish their authority and replace it with the pursuit of material goods, resulting in cultural movements where psychologists, educators, and even Eleanor Roosevelt encouraged parents to treat their children as adults, warning that if parents used too much discipline, it could lead to years of emotional damage. Where Lawrence Samuel, an American cultural historian, explained that Europeans who had taken jobs as camp counselors in the United States throughout the late 1950s were taken back by the brashness of American children. Campers were pseudo-mature and superficially self-assured, with respect given to adults only if the latter provided their worth. Having fun was pretty much all that mattered to these campers, with the descriptor spoiled coming up more than any other. American children were already highly materialistic, these counselors concluded, far more interested in things like cars, television, and business than their European counterparts. Parental love was expressed mostly by the means of things purchased for the campers, a stark contrast to the generational bond in counselors' own countries.
Here's another theory that I have coming from what he just said. You know how people, basically all the criticisms people have from Gen X to really not even Gen X. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic, but millennials and Gen Z and maybe even Gen X, they all come from baby boomers. A lot of the psychology and social pressures and the way that they act and the way that they treat people and the way that they were raised, a lot of that culture was first began with the baby boomers. Like children were where to say it,
than their European counterparts. Parental interested in things like children were, with the descriptor,
pseudo mature, superficially self-assured, and some said after spending a couple months with them, respect only given to adults if the latter proved their worth.
spoiled.
Having fun was pretty much the only thing that mattered to these campers, and the descriptor of spoiled coming up more than any other. That tell me that doesn't sound like like a even a Gen Alpha kid, you know? Like a lot of these teachers are talking about how these newer generation of kids, they basically describe them as this. They basically describe them how they used to describe baby boomers a lot. If you can take any cultural aspect that we have nowadays most of it can be traced back to the baby boomers and how they were raised and how they spent their life as adults. Anyways, that's just a theory that I've been holding on to for a good little bit.
Counterparts. Parental love was expressed mostly by the means of things purchased for the New York Times stating, the overprivileged, overprotected, overindulged child of the oversolicitous parent may well grow up with problems as difficult to himself as those of the youngster who has had too few of the good things of life. Meanwhile, as the Cold War reignited the nation's growing fear of communist expansion, policymakers and educators began framing baby boomers not just as children to raise, but as a mass population to manage, arguing that a rapidly growing America would require greater centralization and government control at the expense of traditional values like autonomy and self-determination. As Robert Cook, director of the Population Reference Bureau, warned in Parents Magazine, how long will it be possible to maintain the American tradition of liberty for the individual in an increasingly crowded economy is another basic question, one for all Americans to ponder. However, instead of national reflection, economist Walt Rostow, chief advisor to Kennedy and Johnson, outlined in his 1960 Cold War Manifesto, The Stages of Economic Growth, that the final goal of American development was not political liberty or individual autonomy, but high mass consumption.
High mass consumption. And nowadays, probably due to this mindset, people are addicted to consumption. Most people nowadays, the only thing that they create is money. That's it. They work 40 hours a week. They create money. That's it. They might create a child, and they don't really raise that child good. That's it. They don't create anything. They don't create any music. They don't create any art. They don't create a good, healthy body. They don't create anything, you know? They don't create, develop, or build. They don't build a car. They don't build a house. They don't do art. They don't create anything, you know? People, they go to work, create a little bit of work, you know, generating a little bit of money. That's it. And then they go home, consume YouTube, consume movies, consume TV. They consume. That's it. People are so addicted to consuming that they find a hard time creating anything. And whenever you don't create stuff, it makes you feel depressed. That's another one of my theories I got. I know I got a whole bunch of theories this video, but you're just gonna have to take it.
Where he argued that technological innovation and material abundance, not population growth, would drive economic success, fundamentally shifting the economy to prioritize the short-term effects of the baby boomer size and future purchasing power, rather than establishing the jobs and systems needed not only for the boomer generation as they came of age, but for future generations to come, with teachers specifically being instructed to discourage individualistic thought and action by instead overly promoting group participation, turning the classroom into a tool to shape conformity. Preparing students to serve a collective, disciplined, and economically productive role in America's ideological fight against communism. A decision that not only cemented consumption as the backbone of American life, but abandoned long-term planning in favor of immediate political and economic gain, placing even further pressure on a generation already being plagued with unrealistic expectations. With American journalist Betsy Fancher stating, "In our efforts to provide all the advantages, we have produced the busiest, most competitive, highly pressured, and over-organized generation of youngsters in history, and probably the unhappiest." Where a 1959 report issued by the federal government, based on classroom observations from educators and visitors, revealed that American school children, many in 4th through 6th grade, were already showing signs of deep emotional distress. The report described students as burdened with inner anxieties and in need of security and reassurances from their parents and teachers. Common fears included
a lot of the issues that younger people might have today in my generation. They start with the baby boomers, you know. People are looking at the baby boomers, and they're like, we need these baby boomers to generate a good economy. They need them to get good jobs. They need them to be good consumers of capitalism, which I'm not going to diss capitalism, even though there's a lot of problems. Personally, I'm a capitalist. But anyways, and these little kids are developing pressures and fear and anxiety based off of these experiences.
failing tests, parents becoming sick or unemployed, and more extreme anxieties like being hurt by knives, poison, fire, or holdup. But the most striking phrase used was a pervasive fear of life, where as a result of the Korean War and rising military tensions, Samuel Winchell, a professor of social studies at Glassboro State College in New Jersey, argued that families' increasing habit of relocation had much to do with children's discontent and growing distrust of authority. The post-war expansion of the economy, construction of interstate highways, and creation of entirely new neighborhoods encouraged Americans to move for better job opportunities. But just as the suburbs failed to offer a lasting sense of place, this newfound mobility caused a deeper feeling of rootlessness, comparing this spatial disorientation to the experience of an immigrant arriving in a foreign country, suggesting it was the foundation for what he called social adjustment problems among American children, where this was also accompanied by the looming threat of nuclear war, which triggered a surge of studies throughout the 1980s, warning that an entire generation was coming of age with a profound sense of helplessness, with Harvard's Department of Psychology stating, "This fear of nuclear annihilation fostered a sense of having no future, an anxiety that persisted into adulthood, influencing personal decisions like delaying marriage and
Having no future. Having no future. That's what a lot of the struggles that my generation is dealing with. We often feel like we have no future. We often feel like we can't buy a house, we can't buy a car, we can't get married or have kids. And the reluctance to get married and create a future generation seems ironical that children and adolescents are losing their hopes for the future at a time where the older generations live longer and have more future than ever before. Bro, this is literally being said about the baby boomers, and this is what's being said now today about Gen Z and most likely Gen Alpha whenever they get a little bit older.
creating a future generation. In England, the School of Humanities and Social Sciences observed a similar trend, writing, "The threat of nuclear war involves an overwhelming threat to the individual's future, that he or she will have no future, that there is no point in planning for marriage, children, or a career." And according to the Department of Psychology at Illinois, there is also cynicism, sadness, bitterness, and a sense of helplessness. Children perceive that the adult generation is unable or unwilling to halt the arms race, which would only be compounded by the Vietnam War, as it was transformed from a distant conflict into televised images of body bags, burning villages, and student protests, further dividing the country as 80% of the soldiers who served in Vietnam came from poor working-class families that could not afford college deferment, where the devastating loss of key cultural and revolutionary leaders, the Pentagon Papers, and Watergate resulted in a generation consisting of 76 million individuals who were raised on the promise of American prosperity, only to be shaped by pervasive fear that their own future was entirely out of their control.
Literally the exact same thing that we're going through today with Gen Z and millennials. They promise us the American dream, and we're very much doubting it and having worries and fears and concerns. You know, baby boomers aren't as different from us, that we even though they might be the most richest generation in human history, the problems that they were going through, they didn't know that they were the richest generation in history, and they didn't know how things were going to be for future generations. So the problems that they felt at the time were basically the same problems that we're feeling now. And so of course they're going to feel like, well, my life wasn't so much more difficult than yours.
And a lasting belief that they had been completely robbed of their ability to create a better tomorrow. And while America's guaranteed economic prosperity experienced the dollar losing 53.7% of its value between 1970 and 1980,
Jeez Louise.
or 10% more than the loss in value in the last 2 decades, baby boomers gravitated towards a leader who promised to restore order through less government intervention, low taxes, free markets, and deregulation, promising that the benefits would trickle down to the middle and working class, with Ronald Reagan's presidency solidifying a lasting ideological shift that redefined prosperity as the result of individual effort rather than collective support, deepening skepticism towards labor unions, social programs, federal regulations, and even fellow Americans, as they were reframed as barriers to growth rather than safeguards for stability, where the inevitable lack of long-term planning throughout the 1950s and 60s left baby boomers entering a labor market that was never built to support them, with a 1983 New York Times article, Baby Boom to Job Bust, highlighting how companies that continued campus recruitment had compounded the oversupply problem by raising their hiring standards. In fields like retail, which had not cut back on college hiring, recruiters found themselves in the enviable position of considering only the top graduates, while simultaneously requiring work experience. Don Franklin, director of executive recruitment for Gimbel's Midwest, noted, "A few years ago, we were happy to find students who had done well academically and were enthusiastic about our company. Now, in addition to good grades, most of my colleagues in retailing are hiring graduates who have had work experience, preferably in this field, and who played a leadership role in extracurricular activities." While Bob Junius, manager of college relations for Continental Bank, added, "In the last few years, more and more graduates, particularly those in liberal arts, tell our recruiters they are willing to be tellers or secretaries if they cannot get into one of our management training programs. We've refused to do that because we suspect they would become frustrated and, as a result, less productive if we couldn't move them into a better job relatively quickly. And we can't guarantee that," causing baby boomers, particularly the younger generation Jones, to simply prioritize career advancement above all else, where the yuppie stereotype, marked by designer clothing, luxury cars, and an aggressive obsession with climbing the corporate ladder, to become the symbol of a generation told to conform, redirecting their anxieties into productivity and endless material consumption, trading the potential of sustainable and shared growth for the illusion of individual advancement, no matter how fleeting or how unequal the outcome. Where despite the 2008 global financial crisis completely altering the trajectory of millennials' careers and Generation X experiencing the largest net worth decline of any generation, a 2010 Pew Research survey found that 80% of baby boomers were dissatisfied with the direction of the country. By comparison, just 60% of millennials, 69% of Gen Xers, and 76% of silent and greatest generation adults reported the same. And even more revealing, 21% of boomers believed their standard of living was lower than that of their parents at the same age, compared to just 14% of all non-boomer adults, creating a generational cycle of arguing over who had it worse, rather than channeling any collective effort into actually changing the system. And so
Baby boomers, the whining generation. It's crazy. If you want to watch the rest of this video, I'll leave the link in the description. It's a really good video. Shout out to Damon Cassidy. The boomers aren't so different from us. A lot of the struggles that they're going through is the struggle that we're going through as well. They're probably not aware of how good they possibly had it in certain aspects, and we're not aware of how good we have in certain aspects, and we're probably going to end up in the same situation whenever we get older, if we don't break the cycle of, trying to figure out who got it harder. Anyways, wonderful video, Damon Cassidy. Hope you enjoy your day. Peace out.